Clayton Christensen, in a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, which is his Harvard PhD in 1997, wanted to understand life cycles of companies and what made some survive and thrive and what made others fail. And in order to do such a study, he needed to find a microcosm of the corporate sector that didn't have, like Coca-Cola and 125-year life histories. He needed a much more rapid forward. So that was the organization, which was Softly. You know, you all did your biology experiments and you worked with fruit flies. And you worked with fruit flies because in the course of a 13-week semester, because that's how we learn in 13-week chunks. In the course of a 13-week semester, you can get 8 to 10 generations of fruit flies. And so we can have red eyes with white eyes and then get one red eye and one white eye, and we can see all the genetic mutations that go along. So Christensen was looking for the organizational equivalent of fruit flies, and he found it in the computer memory industry. And he started tracking who the major companies were by the type of computer memory that was prevalent in the day. So in the early 70s, we had 14-inch drives as big mainframe. Most of you weren't around during those days, but I remember going into the U of R Computing Center, and there's this massive room, and we had to keep it cool, and we had punch cards and all those kinds of readers. Memory was stored on a 14-inch mainframe drive. By the late 70s, we had the 8-inch mini computer drives, the memory systems on the 8-inch drives. Early 80s, we flipped over to the first use of what was called the floppy disk, the 5¼ inch memory. You would take your Apple IIes and you're doing this with your floppy disk and you're loading up with 27 different programs. That came with the invention of the personal computer. 1985, we went to a harder disk. You know those old 3½ inch things, right? The hard shells. What did we call them? Floppy disks. Innovators, right? Yeah, sure, they're still floppy inside. By the late 80s, we said the pace of change is accelerating here, by the way. By the late 80s, we had a 2½ inch drive and then a 1.8 inch drive. And early in the 90s, we had the invention of flash and chips, and now all devices work pretty much on those as your memory device storage. What's really interesting about this is not just the rate of change. What's really interesting is that whoever was the industry leader in one area, leading by far, was gone 2 innovations later. Did not exist. Companies went bankrupt or were bought out by somebody else. And it happened time and time and time again. And so he developed what he called the technology S-curve. And it shows what happens when you put effort in and what kind of product performance you get with that effort. Now, early on in this technology, now we take a look at this slice here, not much time or engineering effort is needed to see really rapid gains in the quality of the product. But after a while, I mean, you're starting to deal with the right tail of your normal distribution where it takes more and more effort to get less and less change starting to happen. So you can invest gazillions of hours and resources when the technology is starting to level off for absolutely minimal reward. Very minimal change will start to happen. And then this second technology comes along and it blows them out of the water. And the reason it blows them out of the water is because when it's introduced, its level of performance is far less than the existing standard. Because it's not nearly as good. You can't possibly learn from a MOOC. Right? Can't possibly. And then another technology comes along and destroys the other one. You see, while we're busily investing all of our time and energy and resources in a diminishing returns, this other thing is accelerating far faster than we can even keep up. That's what he called a disruptive technology. Something comes in that changes the game so substantially, it doesn't matter how hard you work at it, it's not going to change a thing. Another good example, if you ever get a chance to see a little video by Joel Barker called The Business of Paradigm, where he describes what happened to thinking about watches and how the Swiss watch manufacturing industry, who held somewhere around 80-some% of the world market share in watches in 1969, 30 years later had less than 10. Because they did not recognize a digital watch. It didn't have cogs and mainsprings, it's not a watch. See? But a disruptive technology came in and blew them out of the water. Well, what if we apply that to education? I think this is the first technology is the traditional course-based programs that we all love and cherish so much, that run our universities, that we all tend to be bound by. I think the second one, you got this really weird thing over in PDP at SFU. I mean, good gracious, how can you have 12 months of a program with only 1 month of courses? That just makes no sense whatsoever. Okay? But eventually, these things are going to fade away because the consumer, whether we like to call them that or not, is not going to tolerate coming into structured settings and following structured sequences that may or may not have any relevance to them. And what we're not sure about is what's that next wave. But we do know if this technology curve applies to education like it has to virtually every other industry, pretty soon we're going to be toasted. And this new thing will be the ascendancy. And the real point to keep in mind is this business of the curve flattening. It doesn't matter how much more work you put into it, it's going to cost you more and more money, more and more time for less and less results. So at some point, you either have to embrace the new technology, or you've got to take a step back and say, what if we started to rethink this thing all over again? What if we started to rethink it without driving forward through this structural and process orientation that defines our world? That's an act of immense courage, and it's an act of immense difficulty.